Hi, I'm Jamie Heary. I'm the Chief Security Architect here at Cisco. And today I want to introduce you to a relatively new solution that we have called Cloud Insights. It's all about going beyond cloud security posture management. We'll get into a bit of what that means. And let's start with the problem statement. So, multi-cloud world. Most of our customers, most of you live in a multi-cloud world where we have multiple different vendors. We have hybrid cloud as well. We have our data centers, our colos. We still have all of these things around. And each one has its own tool set. So I'd postulate to you that are we asking the right questions in this multi-cloud world? Do we have the right answers? So let's take the first one. Do we have a single unified view of all of your cloud assets in the whole universe of your multi-cloud world? And do you know the relationships between the different assets? Because relationships are key, and there's something the attacker will definitely pay attention to. How about the next one? What and where are my most critical cyber assets at this moment? Could you tell? Would you know in your multi-cloud world today? It includes everything from hosts and networks and infrastructure. What about people? Like people in IAM, like identity access management policy? Would you know that at any given moment? Which leads us to the security posture of all those assets, the attack surface that they come with. What about the interrelationships? Attackers love to do lateral movement. They find the weakest link, they establish a bastionos there, and then they pivot off of that. So do you know the relationships in your full risk profile, 9, 10 layers deep? And then what are the real vulnerabilities that you're protecting yourself against, including the gaps and the risks that come with this multi-IT security controls? Because every vendor out there does it a little bit different from a security control perspective. So how do you keep a handle on the whole environment so that you can quickly understand the scope of a breach? So if you do have an incident, what's the impact? You need those relationship maps in order to really understand the impact. If you have a web server owned, what is the impact to the databases that are feeding it? Is there an impact? Are they protected? What's the scope? And then finally, can we assess the just-in-time compliance of the whole thing? Whether it's compliance regulatory and standards-based, or it's a compliance that you have in your own policy, and then map yourself against best practices in the industry. And you don't have to figure that out. We're going to help you through all of these questions and give you some tools and tricks to do so. So this lack of cloud visibility and control has been around for a little bit. It's accelerating as our move to the cloud is accelerating. And really, number one hits it on the head. We just have this increasing number of cloud assets, increasing number of environments, and constantly changing. In fact, a lot of us are learning how to even live in this cloud environment. So we're bound to make mistakes. We also have a lack of interoperability between the different risk monitoring platforms. Now, for the most part, cloud IaaS vendors, they come with risk monitoring of some kind. Yeah, some are better than others. But none of them interoperate with each other from a full compliance perspective, which leads to this lack of insights into the risks and the vulnerabilities across the multi-IT environment. And it leads to some problems like our inability to quickly scope the impact, of any breach. We also have to think a little bit differently. This interconnectedness of our multi-IT environment, it allows the attackers to think in a connected model. And the applications that they're going after are more complex and interconnected as well. So we need to start to think as defenders in a relationship model, a relationship map that maps the paths and the relationship between the targets so that we have a very good, crisp view of not the profile of an individual server, like maybe a web server, but all of the dependencies that it comes with. And man, there are many today. The APIs that it talks to, the third parties it talks to, the databases, the supporting other servers that it talks to. And then what do they talk to? And what do those talk to? So you need to be able to look at it because that's how the attacker's doing it. They just want to find the weakest link. They get in there and they're pivoting around and heading for the crown jewels. So how are we going to help here? Well, this is what Cisco Secure Cloud Insights is all about. It is a cyber asset attack surface management. And That is really a fancy way to say it's CSPM on steroids. Like it's posture management plus plus. So what does plus plus mean? Let's start at the bottom left. It's comprehensive multi-cloud asset inventory. It's agentless. So you just point it at an account via API to your different services, both in the colo and in the cloud, and it will go out and do that automatic discovery, like real in-depth discovery. It does relationship mapping along the way as well. Full context, it's grabbing all sorts of intricacy of context, like is this thing encrypted or not? Who has access to it? What are the rights and privileges of your different users? Which leads us to the ability to do continuous compliance and posture management. That's what CSPM was grown up to do, and that's a core component of what Cloud Insights can do as well. Always on audit. You can always go and run a PCI audit, for example, get the results back real time. How are you doing in compliance? And then you feel confident that that data is built on real live queries that are happening in the background constantly to get the right evidence. And then finally, investigations and relationship maps. If there is a problem or you're just out there doing threat hunting to see how robust the architecture is you built, we can leverage the graph database technology. You're going to see a lot of that today. It allows us to do two things. One is the blast radius. What is the lateral movement capability if somebody did compromise a particular host? And then what is the root cause analysis and how am I affected because of it?
Is this going to allow us to help customers find their shadow IT in the cloud too? Will this discover things that they don't know about?
Yeah, it will, but not in the traditional sense of shadow IT. So what it won't do is it's not designed to go find SaaS services, like, oh, you're using a box account that's not sanctioned. We have other solutions for that, like Cisco Umbrella. This one is for shadow IT in the multi-cloud. So if somebody goes and signs up an Amazon account and you have no idea, this will help you find it.
Or yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for.
Perfect. And this will help, and it will also help when you have a corporate account and people are just going wild, like they're spending money like crazy, they're bringing up machines in developer mode, but then they're connecting them to the internet and exposing you. It'll find that kind of shadow IT as well. On the journey to complete cyber governance, there are many different ramps on this highway. First one is we need to help you with visibility in the inventory that you're going to build. Once we have the inventory and all the data that goes with it, we can do a good compliance check from an automated evidence collection. And when the auditor comes in and says, I need evidence that that VPC in the cloud is protected by a firewall rule set that is good, we'll go grab the evidence for you, put it and package it real nice. The whole posture management, the CSPM is very important on this journey, which leads us to governance. Everybody's going to have their own little bit of governance. It provides a whole governance backend. You literally can upload your written policies into the system. You can start to make attributes out of those and then make rule sets so that you can make sure that you're automated the monitoring of those governance policies. It's all agentless, so it makes it simple and easy to deploy. And that incident response, because of the relationship maps, gets even easier. It's also hooked right into our SecureX, which is our incident response workflow tool that anybody gets free of charge or just included with anything they get from us. So those two systems are integrated. A high-level architecture of what this is, it's agentless, as I mentioned. There's a huge data ingest, huge database that holds all of this. In fact, it's a graph database. So that's why the relationship maps are core and fundamental to what we do. When we grab those assets, we're grabbing everything that we can possibly grab from all telemetry sources and finding out which assets are related and which information goes where. So you can get us information from the cloud provider. You might get us information from your IAM provider, your identity provider. You might get us information from your vulnerability system, et cetera. There's literally hundreds of different ways we can get in data. And then finally, the investigation and query. The query, and I'll show it to you, is a natural language. You can ask it questions like, do I have any S3 buckets open to the public? Enter, and it will come back and tell you, that kind of information. Speaking of queries, here's a sampling of the questions that you can ask the system. There's over 600 of these predefined queries. You can create your own. They make a really cool way to make a custom query as well. You can convert it into an alert. You can even take a query and go, I want that to become part of my policy of my compliance framework. And you can add it into your compliance framework. Maybe you start with CIS, but you want to add and make it your own. First question, lots of known breaches happen here. Are any cloud storage buckets open to the public? You can just ask it that. Multicloud goes and finds out for you. Storage that doesn't have encryption, doesn't have logging enabled. What about my production instances? Which one are they? There's dev, there's productions, there's much of different levels. Which ones are critical? So let's go out and find that. What about authentication? My root users, they better be using MFA. If somebody goes in and sets up a root user and doesn't have MFA, then this query will tell you. Are there cross relationships between IAM? Different identity managers have trust. A lot of times it's overlooked that there's trust and it's too much trust, it's excessive trust, and it creates problems. And then finally, what about a query that does stuff like which instances are public facing, they're vulnerable, something has a CVSS score of greater than 8, and then tell me which developer introduced those vulnerabilities when they posted the code to GitHub or they checked in that code. Really hard things to answer using the multiple tools that we have. Really easy to answer with Cloud Insights. So let's take a look. All right, here we are in the dashboard of Cisco Secure Cloud Insights. This is powered by our partner JupyterOne. This is the main screen. Right in the middle of it, you have your search bar where you can put those queries. There's a whole really robust query language as well that goes with this. So I type in S3, it comes up with any questions that are in here around S3. I'm going to grab all S3 buckets with indirect public access. That's a pretty interesting one. Indirect public access means a CSPM would probably find public access. A CSPM probably wouldn't find indirect public access, meaning something else has public access that has a relationship with me that's exposing it. So on the left, we start with the internet. So we've mapped out what's allowed to talk to the internet in this area. We have a jewelry handcrafted service, and that's an instance. And then that attaches to 8 other workloads, 8 instances. It all goes back to this IAM role in AWS. And that IAM role is kind of the key here because it's assigned to other things. Like that same role is assigned to a platinum service policy, which allows full control to a private S3 bucket, but not just one of them, 5 of them. And it shows you all of those buckets. If you just looked at those buckets alone, you'd say, yeah, they're fine. There's no public access. But when you look like an attacker would, like, how can I get there? There's a path here and it's pretty wide open. So that's one example of the different buckets that we have. And this kind of relationship map works all over the place to really start to expose vulnerabilities and cracks in the armor around the different interconnectedness that we all live in. All these S3 buckets, you can get some good information on who owns them, where are they, what are they hosting. Here's another one that was part of this that is also accessed. It's a different policy that is allowing that jumping point from an exposed instance all the way back to this S3 bucket. Here's the instance that's public. Right? This is the one that's connected right to the internet. And on the right-hand side, you'll see some problems. It's got full-blown SSH access to the thing. Yeah, there's some database or user identity behind it, but SSH access shouldn't be on my public-facing instance. So I go back, who does that talk to? Well, it's talking to this particular instance, and we just found out it's not running the host intrusion detection agent that you said it should be. So SSH enabled, the host IDS is off. Now, this is looking like a pretty bad day and probably likely that they might make their way with a little bit of effort to that S3 bucket that everybody else thinks is public. So if I got that S3 bucket, I just said, tell me all the things that are connected to it, and you saw it just go, whoosh. It was like 15 other S3 buckets that it fed. All right, so let's take a look at that S3 bucket. When I come into here, these are the other S3 buckets that I could key off of. all these buckets and these repositories, they seem to be more interconnected than ever. So here is 30 of them. So if I got that one, I can then go to these other 30. And around it are all the different privileges that I'm going to enjoy and the users that have those privileges. All right, so here's all my assets. As I said, it does the discovery. I have 130,000 assets in my demo box. 879 of them, though, are critical. So it allows you to really hone in on the crown jewels. It breaks it down by type. 67 apps, 11 containers. 751 databases are here. I have a bunch of network, it understands networking and IP addresses and vendors even. I have 7 different vendors that it's found. 1,100 users have access to this environment. This is multi-cloud, multiple different clouds. If I click on critical, though, it says these are the things you told us are critical: databases, the data source, and this is their telemetry. So let's take a look at our 67 apps. This is the inventory. I don't have a lot of time to go through much detail, but on the left-hand side, you have the display name of the application. It tells you the account it's on. You can go to the exact link of that application. That's in the detail as well. And up above, I can click around to different assets. So here's the data stores, and it goes by type. Here's my users, and it tells me exactly what they have access to. Here's my subscriptions. A lot of people struggle with keeping up on subscriptions because there's so many of them. Domain names that I've registered and what their status is. Deployments that I've done. So much information. It's a literal gold mine. When you're doing multi-cloud, this isn't at your fingertips. You really got to hunt and peck to find it. So when I go into this one, this is an instance. I picked the Hilbert instance. It has EC2 and it's got 2 instances. And when I open those up, it's got 2 particular instances in this workflow. This one has a host intrusion detection problem also. So I know immediately that there's a problem. Well, I don't want to hunt around for all of that. I want the system to tell me. So this is what alerts and open vulnerabilities are for. The alerts, we have 35 of them by severity. There's some that say the root account doesn't have MFA enabled. Here's an S3 bucket that's public but shouldn't be. The ACL on it is way too unrestrictive. SSH is allowed incoming to security groups where it shouldn't be. How about keys? Key rotation. Cisco IT uses the same tool for this use case. Key rotation. How am I doing with rotating my keys? Who are the offenders? And it'll even tell you, who owns those keys. So you can tell the key's been not rotating 180 days. You got to do something about that. It can't happen. What about end of life, end of sale stuff? So here's Lambda, right? We're doing serverless. But there's a bunch of workstations, 24 of them, that are using a known vulnerable with exploit code 8.10 version. Tells me all the ones that are running, all the Lambda functions that are running, who's running them, so that I can go, have a chat with them. But let's see what this impact is. So I just graphed this out, these Lambda functions that are related to that very vulnerable version, because I want to find out where they're coming from. Well, here I see that they're coming from an API trigger. So who's that API trigger talking to? Well, it's coming from an API gateway. And it's going through CloudFront. Well, that's interesting. Who's CloudFront talking to? Well, what CloudFront usually talks to? The internet. So we just learned that a very vulnerable Lambda function is running by an API that we know who now triggered it, that's exposed to the internet. Right? That attack surface is real. Here's compliance. All of our benchmarks. We have 5 different benchmarks I chose. We have others. Gap analysis. Here are the ones you filled. Here's the one we've detected. These are the ones that need more review across Google, Azure. They're all packaged for you. Identity access management. I went into the CIS AWS one. It gives you the evidence through those queries. It packages it up. Tested means we're constantly testing it. Here's one with a gap. So the gap means that what you think it would, we have a gap, and what is it? So which IAM users have access key enabled, but they're not ever used. Tells us the user. There's our suspect. It'll also tell us that there's a bigger problem here because that user has a lot of other problems on it. There's no policy checks on it. It doesn't have the right setup code. It's into production data. There's other issues I can see because of the relationships. In the standard side, very similarly, we have PCI, HIPAA, GLBA. Here's PCI, of course. Same idea. I can click into these to get the evidence that I need. So it's telling me I need more evidence, and you have a gap of servers and systems that are protected by a host firewall. So it's gone out and identified these instances are working without the right configuration on them. So effectively out of compliance. For all of these, I can edit the framework. I can clone the framework and make it my own as I want. Now let's look at Insights. I like Insights because it's like a custom dashboard for you. So this is the main dashboard. You can put different things up here. I like to have my public S3 buckets up here. If there's not an agent installed on the endpoint, if it's internet facing, I want to know about it, especially if it's new. And then what about public buckets? The other one is over in GCP. These are all the stats that I have for GCP, but this one is around accessing the ability to delete buckets. So it says here's all the ones that are up for deletion, and I want to know with this bucket, which is called super secret stuff, so that must be important. There's a role, a Google IAM binding on it. Only 3 people are on it right now. One of them is everyone public. Well, that's not good. So that just means that public has the ability to delete all of my S3 buckets. So somebody obviously made a critical configuration error. It's something we picked up automatically. It's even something we could remediate automatically as well.
You said all of this is agentless, so I'm assuming you're giving, maybe not an administrative account, but you're giving some sort of access to your Amazon account, your Google accounts, special accounts for this to go in and do a bunch of queries on everything that's there. And is it doing not only queries, but is it actually trying to, you said the SSH was open to one, is it actually trying to SSH to all the devices and trying to ping to all your objects and things like that?
Yeah, good questions. So primarily it uses APIs. So the ability to do API queries, so you set up API keys, it'll keep track of the rotation for you and whatnot to make sure that that's good. It doesn't look at any of the data. It looks at the metadata of data. So it's not going to look at your HIPAA protected files, patient records. It doesn't do any of that. So it removes itself from those policy compliance issues that could come if we did. So it's not a DLP system, for example. It doesn't have that capability. Internally, we use it. Our security and trust org uses it. Here's some stats of how much they've deployed it. 170 countries around the globe. The use cases down in the right-hand corner there, security and policy monitoring. They have it integrated into their multiple workflows, into their playbooks, and they use it for our own employee access controls. So when I go in as an employee at Cisco, I can go and request an AWS account for my testing. When I get that account, it comes with this attached. I can't get rid of it. So they know, that when I go out of compliance, do something dumb, I get an alert. A lot of times it'll self-remediate. So that was my session. Down at the bottom in our cloud native security stack, talking about cyber asset attack surface management, Cloud Insights. And then the next 2 sessions, we're going to go up the stack a little bit, runtime, and we're going to hear about secure application. We're going to hear about some of the app dynamics secure app as well.